Hi everyone, this week we are going to go over the policy implications of the first and the second unbundlings for developed nations in particular, and next week I will go over the policy implications for developing nations. Because the second unbundling affects developed nations and developing nations in different ways, then there are going to be different policy implications. This course content is partly taken, if not fully, from SFU professor Nicolas Schmidt's notes. However, I am entirely responsible for any error, and I do not allow this content to be published without my consent. So, the second unbundling is reshaping economic policies, and we are going to go through all kinds of economic policies today. Social policy, education policy, how to educate your population to adapt to the new needs of industries. Competitiveness policy, how do you create conditions which are favorable for your industries to thrive. Industrial policy and trade policy, which are pretty related to competitiveness policy as well. So let's go over the social policy first. Growth requires changes, and changes require political support. So, political support requires sharing gains and pains of globalization. Remember, because of the second unbundling, because things are more uncertain and more individual, it is harder to just focus on the pains or the gains, because everybody is going to not everybody is going to gain at the same time. Some other parts of an industry or different factors of production are going to suffer as well. So it is pretty complicated, but it is especially important as the social contract between labor and technology is being tested by the second unbundling. The fact that now capital and labor can be separated even for the same stage of production. Today, institutions and policies are still crafted for first unbundling environments. For instance, we want to develop the shoe industry in our country. Yeah, great, but are you going to make the shoes from A to Z in your own country? Well, we saw that if you want to be competitive, if you want to compete internationally, this is probably not the best thing to do. So we have labor unions, industry associations, government departments, which are usually defending a whole group within, let's say, an industry, or maybe defending a whole industry. We have economic policies for sunset and sunrise sectors. So sunset sectors are sectors which are developing fast, which are rising. So maybe industries that governments might want to invest in because it's going to create jobs, it's going to create economic growth and so on. Sunrise sectors would be that. Sunset is the other way around. Sunset sectors are dying industries. Industries that used to thrive at some point, but now are slowing down for one reason or another, usually because they lose in competitiveness compared to other countries or other firms. The 21st century social policies should focus more on individuals, not just on the job. So they should protect workers rather than jobs. On one hand, domestic flexibility may reduce offshoring of jobs. So if the labor market is the domestic labor market is flexible, then firms might not need to offshore their jobs, and they might be able to keep some in the domestic territory. Offshoring is the ultimate flexibility for firms. It is always possible to just get work done by people in other countries. So what's important is to protect workers, not just the position of a job. So it's about health coverage, old age pension flexibility, unemployment insurance, income support, and so on. Because of the nature of the second unbundling, more sudden, more individual, more unpredictable. I forgot one. Always forget the fourth one. So it suggests that a typical worker will change jobs and occupations several times in his working life. So the old model of find a job when you're 18 or 20, 21, whenever you're done with your studies, stay there for 40 years, build a career, and then retire, 40 or 50 years, is a rather old model. It is not a model that applies to a lot of us now, that is going to apply to a lot of us. And traditional education path assumes a stable lifetime employment. Usually when you get a certification, more uncontrollable, thank you. When you learn a trade, or when you get a certificate, when you get a degree, usually this degree is specialized. For instance, here we are, you guys are in first year, so you're not, you don't have any major yet, but once you declare a major, you will be taking classes of a certain topic only. Like if you have a major in economics, you will have to take a certain number of economics classes. You might be able to take maybe a stats course or maybe a business course and transfer credit. So substitute maybe a business course or a stats course for an econ course. It is possible every now and then. But unless you have a minor or a double major, you will be stuck with classes of your major. When a factory closes in France, and this happens pretty much every year now. Oh, yeah, sorry about that. Sorry, let me change the chat. There we go. It's former workers who used to work in a specific factory, protest. So if a factory is closing down because of, let's say, employees are too expensive, or it could be cheaper to produce elsewhere. So a French company might be able to be more competitive by offshoring some of its production. So by closing a factory in France. Very often, the workers protest. Labor unions, even from other sectors, from other firms, are going to help to support this protest to have a bigger influence on the government. Well, think about this. If we are in a liberal economy, in a capitalist economy, why should the government save workers that have been laid off because a factory has found maybe better competitive opportunities elsewhere? Technically speaking, if the firm is privately owned, why should the government save those employees? So I'm not saying that those protests are bad or are wrong or not. All I'm saying is that usually they protest because a lot of those workers are above 40 years old, above 50 years old. They have been living in the same city for a while. They started working when they were in their 20s. And now that they are in their 50s, they need 10 to 15 years of work before getting a full retirement pension. And those ones in the labor force are called seniors. They are the ones which are the least employable, the ones that usually employers are not looking for. Typically, employers are looking for fresh graduates or fresh graduates with experience so that they don't need to be trained as much. They are being able to be productive right away. And they are young, so in general, they are dynamic. They are career driven, so they are willing to maybe work overtime or willing to travel a lot for their jobs and so on. So it is very hard for this part of the population, seniors, which are going to have a hard time finding a job. And also because those seniors probably know only one specific type of skill. They only have one specific type of skill, the one they have been using for 35, 40 years in the same factory. So it is very hard for those people to train themselves because although they could go back to school, after all, university is pretty much free in France, they have to provide for the family. They have to get an income. Not everybody is willing to train. So, especially at this age. So it can be very complicated for those ones. And so there should be a focus on retraining workers and on workers' mobility as well. There are some programs that exist in France. One of them, for instance, is about being subsidized for some certificates or some trade or some training programs if you are unemployed. So I have the example of my sister, actually. She is 41 years old right now. And she has been a care aide since she is, I believe, 26. So she didn't finish high school. Then she worked in stores and things like that. Then she wanted to get some training. At 26 years old, she trained to be a care aide. She's been a care aide for a while now. And at 39, around 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, 38, she decided to apply for this training to become a nurse. So once you have enough experience being a care aide, you can apply to this program to become a nurse without having done a nursing school necessarily. My sister already had 2 kids back then. Right now, one of them is 11 years old and the other one is, I believe, 7 or 8 years old. So they are busy. They eat a lot of food. They go to school. Her husband also works. So it was relatively tough, and it was pretty hard for her to fund this program as well because they have a limited income at home, so they have to take care of the children, pay for the mortgage, and so on. She asked the hospital she was working for to lay her off so that she became unemployed. By becoming unemployed, she managed to get a subsidy from the government to get funded this program. She worked for 2 years, and this program, I think, had like 1 month at school, 1 month at the hospital, another month at school, another month at the hospital, where you pretty much learn the theory at school and you get to practice on the field. I believe it was one of these programs, or if it was like 1 year of school and then a whole year in work in a hospital or something. She finished. She's not a nurse. Very happy about it. She really likes what she does. She works in the dialysis department in a clinic close to where I was born. Not that it matters. But the idea is that, at 38 years old, she decided, I want to train myself again. I have kids and stuff, but I might be able to manage everything. I will get unemployment benefits during my training, so I can still provide for my children, and so on and so forth. At the same time, I'm going to work, I'm going to study for my exams and so on. I actually helped her with the English. She's not very good at English, and at some point she had to translate like a document or something, and I pretty much did that for her. So this is what the second unbundling entails. It is important to be specialized in something, because in this day and age, you need more and more specialization. At the same time, due to the uncertainty of the labor market, and due to the fact that it's international, I could apply for a job in, maybe not in Singapore, but I could apply to a job in Europe and go back to Europe next month. Maybe in 2 months. We have to finish for this course to be done. But I could do that. So it is important to stay flexible. So it is important for workers to be versatile in some way. And not versatile in the sense that, I did Econ 102, Philosophy 102, Business 105, Biology 103, Crim 107, or something like that. Because in this case, you will know a little bit about everything, but a little bit is not enough on the labor market. Rather, what you can focus on is maybe having 2 sorts of specialties, maybe 3, and sometimes specialties that go together pretty well. And this is where I'm going to go with the education policy. Under the first unbundling, things operate slowly. We mentioned that things were more sudden with the second unbundling, and we could see things coming. with the first unbundling just by looking at industries as they develop and so on. But things would not change from 1 year to the next. It would take minimum 5 to 10 years. Economic liberalization and governments would also play a huge role on the unfolding of the first unbundling. So the shifts were predictable. You could see where a comparative advantage was present or was going to be present. And so you could see it coming, oh, this sector is going to be in demand soon, so I should invest some time and educate myself to get skills related to that field. Education fosters adjustment and upgrading. There's this idea that, okay, I know this is in demand, I'm gonna do my best, train myself in that, get a degree, certificate, co-op programs, I don't know, internships, to be able to work into sectors which will be in demand eventually. Because the second unbundling is unpredictable and sudden, things are a bit different. Workers will change jobs more frequently. Even if you plan to work in the same industry, let's say you keep working in economics, you keep studying economics, you get your degree, and you want to work in, let's say, in a bank, you might change jobs. You might start as a bank teller. I believe with an undergrad, this is where you start. But on the job, you might train yourself to maybe get a CFA, Chartered Financial Advisor, something like that. And then you might get promoted within the same bank. You might also move to another bank, CPA as well, Chartered Professional Accountant. I never know. But I think CPA is for accountants and CFA is for financial stuff. Or certified professional accountant. Thank you very much. Those things you can learn them on the job. Some jobs actually accommodate for that. They allow you to maybe take half a day off a week to work on those programs, to work on those certificates, or they might train you. They might pay some of the training. But chances are you will change jobs more frequently. And so, with the second unbundling, workers need to acquire new skills. I don't know what IB is. Is it International Baccalaureate? Like the high school diploma thing? Let me know. So, on one hand, it's important to be specialized. On the other hand, it's important to be relatively versatile. And of course, those are two ends of a spectrum. Ideally, you want to be in the middle. Oh, investment banking. Okay. I don't know about that, but probably there are certifications with that too. I'm guessing you can do a CFA without an economics degree if you have something like a college degree or something. I believe that if you get a degree from BCIT or Douglas College, you might be able to get into a CFA, but I'm not sure. Don't quote me on this. I don't know enough about that. But I've heard some of my students in ECON who are now working for the CFA, studying for the CFA and for the CPA. So it's not just about learning things, it's also about learning how to learn. And just so you know, on any job that you're going to be having later on, it is always appreciated by your employer that you show them that you want to learn. That you're not just trying to do the tasks they're asking you to do. Asking questions is usually a good sign of, oh, he's curious, he wants to know more, she wants to know more, she wants to get promoted maybe, but if she learns enough things to be promoted, then she will get promoted. It is usually a good sign as an employee to show your curiosity. And part of it is also learning how to learn. You can go to seminars, go to workshops. You can also ask your firms to go to a seminar or conference, for 3 days. That is, you can represent your own firm there, or you can just go there to learn. So education can get shorter but broader. It's not, you don't necessarily need to go all the way into a PhD and be super specialized. Although, if you get a PhD and are super specialized, you might be able to get some jobs that will pay very well. But it might be a more limited range than if you graduated from a double major, for instance. More focus on retraining and retrainability. So you could finish your degree at 22, 23, start working, and eventually just, okay, I've seen enough, I'm gonna go back to school and maybe do a 1-year MBA or something. MBAs usually are programs you can take if you have some experience on the field already. And I've heard some people do that. They get a bachelor in ECON or a bachelor in business at the business school here. They work for a certain number of years. I believe it's 5 years, not sure. And then they get eligible to get an MBA. They go back to school for a year or year and a half. Sometimes their firm helps them. And they retrain themselves. What's the most important is to find a sweet spot between versatility and specialization. And in particular, it's about learning a combination of skills. So you could learn, for instance, psychology and marketing. So if you only learn marketing, great, you'll be able to do fine in a firm and so on. But if you learn psychology on top, you might be able to work maybe at a higher position and do fancier marketing. I don't know if you're aware of what marketing is about these days, but marketing has a lot to do with psychology. Now they literally put some neuroreceptors in your brain, and when they want to experiment on you, and they check what area of your brain is being stimulated when you buy a certain product, or when you consume a certain product. So neuropsychology, marketing now go hand in hand for many big firms. Yes, get a master's in crystal light therapy. Why not? They are so. That's also something you need to be aware of. Is there are a bunch of new programs that sound good, but that won't help you get a lot of jobs. For instance, I think all those programs are great because in whatever program you're taking, you will be learning. And to me, learning, whatever it is good. No problem with that. But there are some programs that will give you skills which are more or less in demand. So I believe now, is it Harvard or some of those big Ivy League schools have masters of, so it's not exactly masters of gender studies, but is it a subfield of master of gender studies? Very narrow field. And that can be great if you can find a position somewhere as a, research assistant, or if you can do research in this narrow field. I forgot the name, but it's just when looking at it is like, wow, really, like the whole master's is focused on it. Sounds, sounds like a lot of time for not much. So it's great if you can find a position in those things, but if you can't, then your master's will pretty much be useless. And it won't help you get any other job. So you also have to be careful about what types of program you're taking and look at who is offering those programs. Computer science and economics is a great blend. Economics has to do with data more and more. So we could learn models all day long. I teach upper level courses, like 300 level courses, which consist in teaching game theory, industrial organization, international trade, and other topics like that, which are based on models made like 40 years ago or stuff like that. So it's very useful to know those models, but you won't use those models on the job. So usually what you're showing with some degrees is I know this stuff, and to be able to know it, I had to learn it. So I am able to learn whatever you're going to tell me to learn. So sometimes a degree is just about showing to your employer, I can learn, I can be trained, and I can be productive fast. And I'm willing to do it. Rather than just, what type of skills you exactly learned. So it is nice to have a side skill which is very applicable on the labor market. And in particular, computer science, and I am thinking about data science in particular, is very useful. In economics, we care a lot about analyzing economic phenomena, and also making conclusions about causal effects. Did this affect that? However, we know that correlation does not imply causation. And so, computer science, data science, what we call econometrics, offers a bunch of tools that will help us distinguish between a correlation and a causation. We live also in the information age. So any firm that will employ you will have some sort of data. So if you can tell them, if you can show them that you can say something about this data, you can maybe make a couple of graphs, but that could be enough to convince your audience. Or you might be able to make fancy statistical analysis to draw a causation. If you increase your investments in, if you increase money spent in advertising, in a specific form of advertising, let's say YouTube ads, this will increase your profits by this much. This is the kind of stuff that any firm wants to hear. Health science, same thing. Statistics and health science. More and more data is being gathered on health status of people. So a good background in statistics will help you make more reliable predictions, more accurate analyses, and will help you improve patients' outcomes. You probably heard of machine learning. Machine learning algorithms are used in health science now, more and more. They are being implemented into machines which are trying to detect breast cancer, for instance. So there is a lot of research on training those programs, those algorithms, so that they provide reliable predictions. Statistics used in health science used to be, and I say used to be at least like 10 years ago and even and earlier, used to be rather basic, in the sense that because health scientists did not have access to a wide sample or a wide number of variables, the analysis would remain limited. They would learn, of course, some statistics concepts like regressions and so on, things you might hear about later in your studies. But the knowledge was also rather basic, same as in psychology and sociology. They will learn basic statistics, but it would not be enough to provide very reliable results. If you take statistics courses, you will very quickly see that the methods used in those old sociology papers and social science papers in general, those tools were too basic and the conclusions could not be really trusted. So actually there's a lot of research these days that focuses on looking at past papers with maybe new data or new statistical tools. We know that this tool doesn't work in this special case, but this paper used that method there. So definitely the results are not reliable. Rather, this research shows that we should use this tool instead. And then you reapply, you use your new tools on an old data set, and this can change your conclusions dramatically. So it's good to have a blend, and usually a compatible blend. Spoiler alert, if you learn statistics or data science, this is pretty much compatible with any other field you'll be studying. Maybe not so much law. Yeah, if you learn stats and law, well, stats might not be very useful for your law degree. But even in courses like criminology, I believe statistics are being used more and more. Now let's move on to competitiveness policies. So those policies are policies that promote economic growth. That includes the set of institutions and factors that determine the level of productivity of a country. The word productivity here is very important, and I'm going to define it in the next slide. Increasing productivity in a country is a key for output, for income to grow, and standards of living to improve. Competitiveness policies that are pro-growth must foster investment in human, physical, social, and knowledge capital. We'll talk about that too. And ensure the new capital is deployed wisely. So let's get into the concept of productivity. You all know what productivity is about, but this is the formal definition. Productivity is the average amount of goods and services produced by a worker in a given amount of time. Let's say an hour. So usually we measure productivity as GDP per hour worked. Remember, GDP represents production as a whole. It's a quantity measure. It is measured in dollars, but does not take into account, is free of the change in prices over the years. So it's free of inflation. So if you divide this by the number of hours worked, you obtain the amount produced, the amount of money produced by 1 hour of work. It is a very important difference across countries. A country's standard of living depends on its ability to produce goods and services, and thus depends on productivity. It depends on how much can be done in a certain amount of time. Paul Krugman, not the youngest anymore actually, he must be the second youngest now. Second youngest Nobel Prize in economics. He is in particular famous for his work in international trade. And he has a column on the New York Times. So he posts articles on the New York Times on a very regular basis. It is very criticized for being very Keynesian in his way of thinking about economics and economic policies. But please don't think about, this guy is a Marxist, this guy is a capitalist, this guy is a Keynesian. Just think about what the arguments are. Just think about, this guy is smart, so whatever he says is worth reading. But in economics, like many other fields, there are two stories behind the same phenomenon. So of course, he might be biased and might look at one side of the story, and it's important to also look at the other side of the story. So what he said in 1994 is, productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it is almost everything. A country's ability to improve its standard of living over time depends almost entirely on its ability to raise its output per worker, or output per hour. That's a very important quote. And in fact, some research has shown that what we call the business cycles of GDP booms and busts, are mostly driven by productivity gains. Think about the example of Robinson Crusoe. Okay? No Jeff Bezos here. If Crusoe is good at catching fish, growing vegetables, and at making his own clothes, he lives well. Otherwise, he lives poorly. So, his standard of living will depend on how much he can get done. So, it will depend on his productivity. The mechanism is the following. If Crusoe finds a better place to fish, like a secret spot, he will spend less time catching fish. It's going to be less costly for him to catch one fish, less costly in terms of time or in terms of resources in general, because he might not need to make a very fancy trap. Maybe an easy trap is going to work in an area where many fish swim. And then he can spend more time making other goods he enjoys. Or he can invest by planting more vegetables that can help him with his own consumption in a few months. So once he can cover his daily consumption of fish, or in general daily consumption of food, he can use the remaining time to focus on other things. Shelter, clothing, planting vegetables for later. He can start playing with seasons and so on. So the way he lives, his comfort, will depend on how much he can get done in the first place. Moreover, the more he invests, think about planting vegetables for instance, the more efficient, the more productive he's going to get. So there is also this idea that once he doesn't have to focus only on the catch of the day, he can also start investing his own skills. Of course, at the beginning, planting vegetables is going to be crappy. He won't be very good at it because he might not know where the good soil is. He might not know how much water is needed. He might not know what grows under what season. Over time, you adjust. You have time for that. You're like, oh, this doesn't grow very well. Maybe I can put the seed somewhere else. Or maybe I can put more water, and so on. And so you can invest in pretty much human capital here. Getting knowledge, training yourself how to be better. And if you keep doing that, within 2 years, let's say, because you need some seasons to pass and so on, within 2 years, you might be able to even take days off and have enough food for like a week or something. You might be able to learn how to store your food. You might be able to find some salt, like coarse salt that you can use to store your fish. You can make dry fish for seasons where fish is very hard to catch. You can grow vegetables so that you have vegetables all year round, and so on and so forth. And this is no different for a country. The mechanization of agriculture has allowed us to increase food production with a much smaller share of the population than it used to be the case. Remember my first 2 lectures when I talked about the agricultural revolution around minus 10,000. That was before mechanization, but people back then were already using tools. Think about the invention of the wheel. The wheel helped a lot to carry food from one spot to another, so it increased productivity a lot. Now with the mechanization of agriculture, if you just pass by a field, think about going to Alberta, for instance, to the prairies, where you see all those cattle, all those cows. The Angus beef is located in the prairies in Canada. You can also pass by a bunch of fields of wheat, corn, and so on. And you can see that only one person is working there, maybe 2. They have their machine, and that's enough for them to cover acres and acres of land in a day. Whereas it used to be the case that people had to do these things manually. So you would have 20 people in a row just manually picking up the corn and so on. In fact, back in my hometown, every summer, there are some local farms, which are looking for young people for season work. They wake up at like 6 or 7 in the morning, maybe even earlier, like 5 in the morning, and they pick up corn, or they pick up strawberries, or they pick up cherries in the fields, and they usually finish around 3 or 4 because it can get very hot in the afternoon, so it can be very painful. It's a very usual thing for young people to do in my hometown. I worked in factories. I mentioned the cheese factory before. Other people just work on the fields and pick up corn and so on and so forth. Working in a factory is fun. At least it's not too hot. Although it can get hot in some areas of the factory. But it is grunt work. It is very, very hard work. So people moved to manufacturing, and the same phenomenon has occurred. Once agriculture was covered, and agriculture did not need that many workers to provide enough food for everybody, then people moved to manufacturing, making more tools, making better tools, making clothing and so on, working on shelter. Then, especially with the second-hand bundling, which I'll get to at some point, but manufacturing also got covered eventually. The production processes were well established, super efficient, costs were cut all over the place, so that eventually it became a process that requires a certain number of workers, and all the other ones can focus on services around the manufacturing process. Which is why I talked about the smile curve. I hope you saw this one coming in the midterm. Typically, productivity increases are associated with increases in the stock of capital. Not only, but it is a leading component. And here we are going to distinguish several forms of capital. Human capital, pretty much what I'm doing right now. I'm giving you human capital, I guess. You are accumulating human capital being at university. Physical capital, that will be closer to machines and production facilities. Social capital is more related to networks and relationships around you. And finally, knowledge capital, which is not exactly the same as human capital, which is more related to the knowledge that firms are keeping for themselves about how to make a certain good, for instance, or the secret recipe of Coca-Cola, this kind of stuff. So let's get into the definitions. Human capital corresponds to intangible aggregate resources. It's very hard to touch, right? It's a textbook could be called human capital, but it's actually the act of learning. It's you having this knowledge, which is the human capital part, possessed by individuals and groups within a given population. These resources include knowledge, talents, skills, abilities, experience, intelligence, training, judgment, wisdom. You see, those words can be, sometimes it's hard to draw a line between those different concepts, but they are all related to stuff on the brain. Possessed individually and collectively, the cumulative total of which represents a form of wealth available to nations and organizations to reach their goals. Human capital is anything that makes you smarter. So experience can make you smarter. In some fields, experience matters way more than your degree. Skills matters. Talents, pure knowledge matters as well. And so on. If you, I don't know if you've heard of Elon Musk recently, but Elon Musk pretty much said that what they're looking for, like employees, people they're looking for at Tesla, are not just people who went and got a degree from a university. What he said is, university is nice to be around people of your age, to learn a couple things, but it's not what makes you functional in the firm. It's not what makes you creative. Right now, especially this course, it's a basic course. I'm not asking you to be creative. I'm asking you to accumulate some knowledge. This is just due to the structure of the course. Once you get to 200, 300 level courses, you can start including essays because you've accumulated skills over time, plus the ones on the course, and you can start making your own economic arguments. So pretty much what he said is that he's not that much interested in pure university education, rather is interested in what applicants do around, what kind of side activities they do to train themselves to learn on their own. He was saying as well that many very smart people are college or university dropouts. Steve Jobs, Bill Gates, people who made Google in the first place are dropouts as well. Many very smart people are people who stop universities halfway because they had a great idea. They were smart in the first place, but they also were smart enough to just go with their idea without finishing their degree because maybe they did not deem it necessary. Oh, you're right. It is a survivor. It is a survivorship bias. Absolutely. Of course, I'm only citing the winners, and behind the winners there is a mountain of losers, a mountain of people who dropped out of high school, or not high school, university, and tried to make their own firm, and it didn't work out. It's true. But what he was trying to say here is that the skills that we're looking for are not skills that you learn in university, rather are skills that you learn after applying what you do in university, or that you learn on your own. But of course, it's Elon Musk, it's Tesla, so they're looking for super high profile applicants. Oh, before I move on to physical capital, as I mentioned as well, for many employers, a university degree is just a signal that you are smart enough or to learn and to train yourself and to be productive in a sufficiently short amount of time. As I mentioned, if you get a degree in economics, employers won't ask you to solve a game theory model. They won't ask you, make a model and figure out a solution. With an undergrad, you won't know enough about game theory to make a model of your own. Rather, what you're going to show to your employer is, I got a degree from a university where getting this degree is not easy. There is a certain standard that I satisfied, so I am smart enough, I know enough things, I have enough common sense, my blend of skills is good enough for me to be trained and be productive at your firm. That's mostly what it is about. One of the reasons employers love Harvard applicants or Ivy League schools applicants is that they know that anybody who went to an Ivy League school is smart. Because to get into an Ivy League school in the first place, you need to be smart. And Ivy League schools also make you even smarter. They train you. What they teach you is not bullshit. But, just so you know, the economics degree at SFU is as hard as an Ivy League school's economics degree. What the kids are going to learn in Harvard in an undergrad in econ is not any harder than what we are teaching in this degree. It is harder to get in, so maybe they get to select smaller people than SFU manages to. And I am one of them. I just finished studying at SFU last year, and I didn't get into Harvard. Didn't apply. Did I apply? Maybe I applied for fun. I forgot. Just to see what they would say. Just to annoy them for 10 minutes. But a PhD in economics stays a PhD in economics. There is a minimum standard that any PhD in economics is going to satisfy. Okay, let me move on to physical capital. Those are the tangible assets that assist in the production process. So buildings, machinery, office supplies, transportation, computers. Typically, capital is referred to something that is going to last for more than 1 year. So if your firm needs trucks for transportation, well, usually trucks are assumed to be used for more than 1 year. Same with a photocopier at your office. But the paper you buy for your office will not necessarily be considered as physical capital. Okay? Buildings, usually you rent a building for more than a year. Machinery, same thing. This can be used for more than 1 year. Computers as well. Knowledge capital, before moving to social, is also assimilated to the intellectual capital. Again, this is an intangible asset, like human capital, which represents valuable ideas, methods, processes, and other intuitive talents that belong to a company. It hardly depends on the talent and, or largely depends, on the talent and expertise of employees. So, knowledge capital will be linked to human capital. And it is very important because it gives firms an advantage over other firms. It is hard to replicate. It is knowledge capital that firms are trying to enclose in their patents. I can make something that you can't, so I want to protect it, to keep my advantage. But to produce this knowledge capital in the first place, I had to employ a bunch of people with a high human capital. Examples: Coca-Cola secret formula, next iPhone design, patents, trademarks, anything that is related to the firm. So when Ford or Taylor or Toyota, I don't know if you know, but they're the main three people known for having invented important production processes, the conveyor belt, the division of the production process into simple tasks so that everybody can focus on one task and get way more done in 1 hour. Toyota invented Toyotism, which is another production process, in contrast with Fordism and Taylorism. I think it was invented in the 60s by Taishi Ono. If I remember my high school classes well, it's been a long time. But he also, on top of the production processes that Taylor and Ford built, he also built a couple of extra. He built on those processes and added a couple of things that greatly improve productivity. Those ones were not. I don't think they were patented. But this is a pure form of knowledge capital. Let me finish with social capital and we'll take a short break. So social capital, defined by the OECD, is referred to as networks, families, friends, colleagues, people. Together we share norms, values, and understandings that facilitate cooperation within or among groups. In short, it refers to human interaction that depends on trust and reliability, often based on unspoken and unquestioned rules or norms. Social capital is important because economic interactions require trust and the presence of a sense of social justice. A firm with a strong social capital will tend to be more productive because cooperation is easier. There are less coordination problems because employees can trust each other. They share the same norms, the same rules regarding meeting deadlines, regarding meetings, regarding maybe work ethic. And this will greatly affect productivity within a firm as well. Social capital is also the network that you're going to build. So it could be the network that you're building right now at university, right now in this class, on this Zoom lecture. Remote lectures, of course, make it difficult for people to meet and to create connections. But chances are that if you manage to, take other classes with the same people, eventually you might build connections. That might be people you can talk to if they have a job and maybe you want to get a job in a similar firm, or if maybe you have a job and they ask you for help. Social capital is, getting to know your professor, or for a professor to know their students, because at the end of that can come recommendation letters for job applications and so on and so forth. I write recommendation letters on a regular basis. I think there was one 2 days ago that I wrote again for one of my students for an application to a master's program in UK. All those things is social capital. So value it. Of course, it's very hard to build it and maintain it when you study remotely. Try still to use it. There is, for example, the Discord was a great initiative in this course that probably might help some people to make connections. Things such as, is anybody taking business 1 or 2? Oh, I am as well. Did you work on the last assignment? Things like that. But that's how you make connections. And social capital varies significantly across countries, even within firms. You can think of firms as having employees from, let's say, Canada, and having employees in, China, India, or anywhere else. If those employees need to coordinate in one way or another, there might be issues because those employees don't share the same work ethic or the same culture. A friend of mine works for a Canadian company. She's an engineer. She works here in Canada. She is originally from China, but she got her degree from UBC and so on. And she had to, before COVID, to go to China on a regular basis to kind of train and work with the local Chinese workers on plans regarding water treatment and things like that. She was telling me that is now very difficult to work with them remotely because she's on calls all the time. With the time difference, she has to, of course, be on calls very late at night or sometimes early in the morning. And she was telling me that the work culture in China is very different from the work culture here. And it's very hard to, sometimes they make a lot of mistakes, a lot of errors because they only apply orders. They only are told to do it in a specific way and they do it in that way. As opposed to think about it, maybe have a doubt. Oh, I'm not sure. I'm going to call the engineer because maybe something is suspicious. And she was telling me that every now and then she had big issues with that and she had to do a lot of overtime over the phone just to tell people to do it in a specific way. And if they feel something is suspicious, they should call instead of just apply the process. Let's take a 5 or 10 minutes break here. Let's resume at 12 or 11:55. Okay. No estimate for the midterm grades. I know the TA is on it, but I don't know when it's going to be done. Yeah, hopefully next week. I would like it next week. That will be 2 weeks of grading. I think that should be enough. But yeah, I don't know. Sorry about that. the final exam will be cumulative, yes, and for now it's going to be closed book. I will post an announcement about that later if things are going to change. I'm reading the chat. Okay, 11:55. We can resume. Hopefully I won't be late on this lecture. Okay, let's resume. So, I was talking about 4 different forms of capital, all of them being important, and all of them can be subject to government interventions, in particular government investments. Okay. Now, what's important to know also is that each type of capital is going to have a different impact, a different effect, and governments or some economies might not be able to reap all the benefits of investing in one form or another. So the policies chosen usually involved investment in knowledge capital with government-sponsored research, private sector R&D subsidies, tax breaks, support for research-oriented universities, and the like. SFU is largely funded by the British Columbia government, for instance. So most of your and my professor's research is being funded by the government. Promoting investment in human capital with policies linked to education, training, retraining. I mentioned the case of my sister for France. Education is almost free in France, very cheap or free if you don't have enough income. You can think of other measures as well. In Canada, it's a bit more expensive for domestic students, and it's super expensive for international students. I'm really sorry about that. There's nothing I can do about it. But I believe that domestic students can apply for scholarships when they're in high schools and other things like that. And promoting investment in infrastructure and social capital. So, building hospitals, building schools, that would be the physical capital aspect. That would include in it some form of social capital, a sense of community, finding support, and so on and so forth. So the key question should be, why is a government intervention needed? Why does the government need to subsidize, give tax credits, change rules, or act directly, and so on? Oh, 300 a month in Germany? Yeah. France is 200 a year, so for the first 2 years. For the first 2 years you pay 200. For me was what? I think it was free for the first 2 years until 20, and then it was 200 per year. Plus 200 of student benefits, like the health benefits and so on. Yeah, no, it was there are many universities that in Europe in particular that offer close to free or free education. Most universities are public in Europe. Yeah. So, when is the government intervention needed? Well, the answer should be when the market cannot get it right, because a government intervention through subsidies or taxes usually leaves a net loss in one way or another. So you can think of taxing as being a necessary evil. The government taxes not because they love it, but because they need to fund infrastructures and so on. Or the answer should be with a policy directly linked to the reason why the free market does not get it right. So the focus should be on spillovers or externalities. That's going to be the most important concept of today. An externality is a side effect or consequence of a market activity that is not reflected in the price or costs, nor taken into account by the market. Externalities could be negative. In this case, we talk about an external cost. It is a cost that falls on people other than those that pursue the activity. For example, if you decide to smoke a cigarette next to somebody at a bus stop, your consumption is going to affect the bystander. It's going to lower the utility of the bystander, but the bystander is not getting any money from it. You're not paying the bystander to be allowed to smoke a cigarette. You just smoke it. And if the smoke goes to the bystander, well, fuck it, kind of. Same if you consume gasoline for your car. Every time you consume gasoline, your car consumes gasoline, you are going to generate pollution, which is going to affect the quality of the air around you, like beyond you. But nobody is getting a dime from you polluting the air, you or me. Okay? So externality return corresponds to an external effect. The externality could be negative when your transaction, your consumption, or your production, if you're a producer, is harming other people without the market taking that into account in one way or another. It could be positive as well. If there is a benefit received by people, but the market is not compensating you for making those people better off, or those people are not paying you to generate more of that externality. Think about vaccination. Vaccine is for yourself, sure, but most importantly in terms of effect, it is for others. Because as soon as you get vaccinated, you reduce the probability of everybody around you getting sick. So if you don't get a vaccine shot but other people do, you are free riding on them. You pretty much can say, oh, thank you very much for paying for your own vaccines. I didn't, because I didn't want to pay. Thank you, because now I am enjoying your immunity. Because I'm sure you won't give me the vaccine, the disease. When you go to get your vaccine shot, nobody is paying you for that. The government subsidizes some of the vaccine shots, not all of them. I did a vaccine, I think, last year, just before COVID. It was like December 2019. I did the vaccine, which was $130 per shot, and I had to do 3 shots. You know, that's kind of like, ugh, that hurts. I'm like, okay, I have to do it, but that's steep. It depends on the vaccine, of course. Bee farming improves the nearby orchard yields through pollination. So if you have, like, let's say you have an orchard, you're growing fruits next to a beekeeper. The beekeeper is going to have bees. Those bees during the day are going to gather pollen and, bring it back and create honey out of it. The act of pollination is actually increasing the yields of the orchard. There is this saying that says that if there are no bees in the world anymore, humanity is screwed, is doomed. Within 5 years, humanity is gone. Because the role of bees in the pollination process is so huge that without it, it's going to be very hard for humanity to survive. So, when the externality is negative, think about pollution, the costs to society are larger than the private costs. Or if you are thinking of consuming gasoline, so you create pollution with your car, then you can think that for you a gallon of gasoline costs whatever money. I don't drive, I don't know the prices of gasoline these days. However, in terms of polluted air, the overall society's cost of a gallon of gasoline is your cost, because you are included in society, plus the cost that everybody else is going to incur due to breathing polluted air. If the externality is positive, this is the other way around. The profit returns, whatever you're doing that is benefiting you, is also going to benefit others. So society as a whole, you yourself included, is going to benefit more than just yourself. When the market is not able to take externalities into account, the market outcome is inefficient. if you take more classes with me later on in your studies, you will probably study externalities. I teach externalities a lot. If the outcome is not efficient anymore, remember Pareto efficiency, same thing, then there is a market failure. So every time you are thinking about an activity, production or consumption of a good or service that generates positive or negative externalities, we have a market failure. We need to do something about it. The market outcome is too high when the externality is negative. If you consume gasoline for your car, you are not thinking about the pollution that other people are going to incur, the polluted air. So you are going to consume too much gasoline relative to the socially optimal amount, the efficient amount. The efficient amount would require a bit less gasoline being consumed because of the cost, because of the pollution of the air. But this is the other way if the market outcome is too low. If the externality is positive, you are not thinking about all the benefits, all the good that you're bringing to others around you. You're just doing your thing for yourself, like getting a vaccine. And so the market outcome is too low in this case, and there should be more of that good being consumed. Think about studying. Any knowledge that you acquire is going to create positive externalities, because people around you will benefit from your knowledge. If you do health science, think about the pure knowledge of health science or being a doctor. Well, now your family has a doctor for free. So they benefit from your knowledge. But some people in your family, like your cousins, did not pay for your education. They were just happy to free ride on your knowledge. Okay? So a policy is then called for whether through taxation or subsidization. We call this Pigouvian taxation. It is related to Arthur Pigou, which is the guy who pretty much invented the taxes and subsidies to correct externalities. By the way, if you have studied John Maynard Keynes, Pigou was his supervisor. So maybe you've heard of Keynesian economics and so on. Pigou was the supervisor of Keynes. And you can use other policies. If you are thinking about activities that generate negative externalities, you tax them because you want to reduce the equilibrium quantity. In the case of consuming gasoline for your car, the carbon tax. The carbon tax is a Pigouvian tax. It is aimed at making people consume maybe less gasoline, so maybe they take the bus instead, or maybe they switch to a car that consumes less gasoline, and so on, in order to decrease the market equilibrium amount of gasoline being consumed. But activities that generate positive externalities are going to be subsidized. Education. Education is good for everybody, not just for yourself, so it should be subsidized. That's the idea. And that's how you get all this cheap education in many Western countries. Competitiveness policies emphasize the role of positive externalities: innovation, education, infrastructure. No, PST is not Pigouvian sales tax. It's provincial sales tax, I believe. So PST is a tax that is going to change across provinces. For example, Alberta is imposing lower PST, a lower PST. So it is a reason why people who live at the border of Alberta go to Alberta to buy booze, for instance. Oh, no PST at all? Okay, even better. Thank you. Which is one of the reasons some British Columbians go to Alberta to fill up on gasoline, to tobacco, booze, and so on. Yeah. So again, innovation helps more than the innovator. Okay, we all benefit from this day and age. We all benefit from smartphones and other things like that. Yes, we paid for it, but we are enjoying this knowledge that somebody came up with at some point. Primary schooling helps the whole society. The more educated people are, the healthier they tend to be, the more knowledgeable they tend to be, the more socially responsible they tend to be. And again, I say they tend. Not everybody is. I'm not very responsible, but I have some education. And infrastructure helps the whole society. Same thing. Hospitals, schools, roads, and so on. It was easy to do with the first unbundling because you could target a whole industry rather easily. You knew that this was the industry that would create jobs and so on. With the second unbundling, because it's more uncontrollable and more individual, it would be more difficult. I won't point out what's been said in the chat, but it's pretty funny. So it is important to also distinguish between factors of productions, the ones which are internationally mobile and the ones which are immobile. Both matter, both contribute to national income, but if they have to be subsidized, you have to think that the ones which are internationally mobile will show returns somewhere else than on the domestic country. So if your taxpayer money is being used to fund factors which eventually will show yield return somewhere else, it's kind of a waste. So not only we need to think about spillovers or externalities, what generates good externalities, what do we need to look at, what do we need to invest in, but also what is susceptible to run away. So we have to think about the stickiness of factors as well. So if you look at productive factors as having those two features, positive spillovers or positive externalities, same term, and stickiness, then you can start ranking different forms of factors of production according to their stickiness and their spillover ability. Take an example of financial capital. Okay? Financial capital, maybe I can put myself, no, I can't, okay. So, financial capital is very mobile. If you tax financial capital too much, owners of financial capital are going to tell you, nope, I'm gonna put my money in another bank. I'm gonna go to Cayman Islands or whatever. I'm gonna go somewhere. I'm gonna go to a better place, a tax heaven, and so on, or fiscal heaven. And it does not have very positive spillovers either. Financial capital is usually privately owned. But if you think about basic science is very mobile. In this day and age, you can just learn anything from Wikipedia, wherever it was made. You can read a paper made in China, or made in Europe, or made in Africa, from Canada. But it has a great amount of spillovers. Because the more knowledge is being built, the smaller we get, the older we can live, the healthier we get, and so on. Not only it increases the reputation of the researcher who publishes some work, but it benefits everybody that acquires that knowledge and applies it in one way or another. You can think about physical capital, which is moderately mobile. Some of it can be moved, not everything. It's not very easy to shut down a factory, and you can open a factory somewhere else, but you need to invest in new machines and so on. It's pretty hard to move those gigantic machines from one country to another. And it has a moderate amount of spillovers. Social capital has a lot of spillovers. Think about network effects. I mentioned this before in the beginning of the second unbundling. Social capital benefits from network effects or network externalities. The more people you know, the better it is, because the more people they know, the even better it is. LinkedIn, typically. It is not necessarily very mobile, although in this day and age we can maybe mitigate on that point. But if you think about real human interactions, they are rather limited in terms of international mobility, and so on. So the more internationally mobile the target is, the less likely a country can capture the returns to the policy promoting it. If you subsidize basic science, it's great because spillovers are good, but it's also very mobile. So there are chances that this knowledge might pretty much flee the country. Have you heard about the brain drain? So the brain drain is, well, it mostly works, it's a phenomenon that mostly happens in France, where education is good. I would say excellent, maybe not number one, but it's definitely top 10 in terms of what we learn. Education is subsidized, very cheap. You can go to any public university and get a very solid education. You don't need to go to a Parisian university, which is private, and so on and so forth. You can go to a public university and you're good to go. My university was very, very small. Like literally my cohort, first year cohort, all cohort, ECON cohort, 100 people. Second year, 40 people. My whole ECON cohort. Yet, I managed to make it here. Believe it or not. So, the brain drain comes from the fact that I benefited from a great education at a very low cost, or maybe a cost for the government, which was subsidizing my education. Yet, I went to another country, and now I am using my knowledge in another country than France. So France, the French government, is not seeing a single euro of return coming from investing in my education. That's an example of the brain drain. The US are very good with that because they fund graduate schools pretty well. They propose funding to everybody that wants to come to grad school. So they let people do their undergrads anywhere in the world. And then they say, come get a master's and get a PhD here. You'll see, we're going to fund you and you're going to find a good job. It pays well afterwards. That's very nice. It's very good for the US. Because the US are benefiting from people who also already have a background education from somewhere else that they didn't have to pay for. Then they pay for grad school. They subsidize it one way or another. And the US economy benefits from a highly educated worker that they only train for 2 years for a master's and maybe 5 years or 6 years for a PhD. I will quickly finish on spillovers and stickiness, and we'll resume the lecture next week because, I won't have time to finish today. Yes, African countries have that a lot. When I was back home, especially when I went to grad school, I did my master's back home. I was in a class with many people from Africa, French-speaking African countries, who did their bachelor in their country back home. So that would be Cameroon, for instance, is an example. Cameroon, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia. And then they would come to grad school in France, finish their degree in France, and work in France. So that would happen a lot. And at least the African people that were studying with me were beasts. like super good. So maybe it's a survivorship bias as well, but definitely they were already coming with a strong educational background. Even if there is market failure, promoting basic science or financial capital is unlikely to affect local production because it goes wherever its reward is highest. So France subsidizes education, trains great people, like trains people to have a very high level of education overall. Even if you only do like a 2 years college degree, you have a very pretty good education. You're pretty productive. But since opportunities are not that interesting in France, people go to other countries. Guilty here. I literally came here because opportunities were better, and opportunities still are better. So it is better to coordinate highly mobile targets at the international level through a patent policy, a common patent policy, rather than different countries having different patent policies. Large basic science projects, so cooperation between different countries, like research centers which are not limited to a country but rather gather different countries. You have European research centers, for instance, in Europe. Research and development subsidies are less obvious, but probably still a good idea to promote at the local level. What is complicated about R&D is that it is uncertain. Sometimes you fund research that doesn't get anywhere, doesn't get any result. That's the risk. But if you're Canada, the Canadian government, and you want to subsidize a Canadian firm for them to come up with, let's say, a vaccine for COVID-19, if they come up with a vaccine, it's going to be very good for that Canadian firm. And overall for the rest of the world, in particular vaccines, because of its positive externalities. On the other hand, promoting technical education has a high return because people with technical education are less mobile. So more, think about like trades, shorter degrees, and so on. Highly skilled labor is internationally mobile. That's going to be your case. Whenever you get a bachelor, you might be able to work for any company in the world, from anywhere actually. Probably by then, working from Zoom is going to be another day at the office. And so you might be able to work from your home for a company in Singapore. The way to make it less mobile is to create industrial or high-tech clusters or hubs in cities and around universities. And I'm going to talk about next week the importance of cities in the 21st century. Let me stop here at human capital is key. Have a good rest of your week and see you in the next one. Bye.